1687. Thunder rolled across the plains of Hungary. Once invincible, the Ottoman Empire faced its reckoning. At Mohács, the Habsburg armies struck a crushing blow, one that shattered Ottoman power in Europe forever. This is the story of the battle that broke an empire. In 1526, the fields of Mohács were soaked in blood. The Hungarian kingdom was utterly defeated and collapsed. The Ottoman Empire rose in triumph, victorious. A single battle had annihilated a nation's independence, leaving a lasting, painful scar that persisted for generations. By 1687, the tides of history had brought these two powers back to the same ground to fight once more. This time, however, the balance of power was shifting, starting to change. The Ottomans were marching to protect their reputation and what was left of their pride. Sultan Mehmed IV's rule was faltering, on the verge of total collapse. The empire's once feared janissaries, its elite infantry, had become restless and were unreliable for Grand Vizier Sara Süleyman Pasha. This confrontation was far more than just another campaign. It represented the last opportunity he had to defend the empire's honor and restore its former strength. Across the vast plains, the Habsburg forces advanced, led by Charles of Lorraine and Maximilian of Bavaria. They possessed modern artillery, well-disciplined infantry, and, most importantly, a memory that had not faded with time. The humiliation of 1526 was deeply etched into their history, and now they sought to reclaim their dignity on the very same battlefield where it had been lost so many years before. The plains of Mohács once again stood ready to drink the blood of thousands of soldiers. This clash would not only determine the fate of land and power, but also the future of empires and the survival of crowns. Welcome to Past Frame, the channel where history truly comes alive. Be sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover the pivotal battles, mighty empires, and compelling stories that have shaped the world we know today. Music. The summer of 1687 brought an ominous, heavy silence across the Hungarian plains. Villages were deserted, farms stood abandoned and neglected, and the land seemed to wait in anticipation for the sound of marching boots and the rhythm of beating drums. Everyone knew that Mohács would once again become the stage where two powerful empires would measure their strength against each other. For the Ottomans, this was more than just another military campaign. The empire had begun to show signs of weakness and tremble after the failed siege of Vienna 4 years prior. That crushing defeat had shattered the image of invincibility that they had carried for centuries. Now, the empire's borders were threatened. Its armies were weary from constant warfare, and its people were increasingly divided. Sultan Mehmed IV watched from his palace in Istanbul as his empire struggled to maintain its grip on Europe. The enormous responsibility for holding it together ultimately fell on the shoulders of Grand Vizier Sara Süleyman Pasha. He gathered his armies, demonstrating a strong determination to prove that the Ottomans were still masters of the battlefield. Tens of thousands of soldiers were summoned, cavalry from Anatolia, janissaries from Istanbul, and auxiliary troops from all corners of the empire poured into the Hungarian lands. The vast Ottoman camp stretched for miles, filled with tents, supply wagons, and seemingly endless lines of horses. But the spirit within those camps was no longer the same as it had been in the glorious days of Suleiman the Magnificent. The janissaries had grown restless, often questioning orders and openly defying discipline. Whispers of discontent and rebellion spread quickly through the ranks. Yet, the Grand Vizier desperately hoped that the memory of past victories would be enough to hold them together and inspire them. On the other side, the Habsburgs prepared with an entirely different kind of energy and spirit. Charles of Lorraine, a commander who had been seasoned by years of fighting against the Ottomans, led the Imperial Army. Alongside him stood Maximilian of Bavaria, bringing with him the renowned discipline of the German states. Their forces were not only well equipped with the latest weaponry, but also highly motivated and eager for battle. They possessed modern artillery, well-organized musketeers, and a cavalry expertly trained to fight with precision. Even more importantly, they had powerful allies on their side, the Holy League. formed after the Ottoman retreat from Vienna, brought together soldiers from Austria, Bavaria, Hungary, and even several Italian states. It was a coalition that was united by a single, unwavering purpose: to drive the Ottomans out of Central Europe once and for all. The numbers on both sides were immense, almost unimaginable. The Ottoman army was believed to field around 60,000 men. The Habsburg and Holy League forces together numbered close to 70,000 soldiers. It was truly one of the largest gatherings of armies that the 17th century had ever witnessed. The plains of Mohács stretched wide and flat, providing open ground that was perfect for cavalry maneuvers, but equally deadly when artillery was strategically placed with precision. Both sides fully understood that the land itself would play a truly decisive role in the upcoming battle. As the armies moved closer to each other, the tension in the air thickened to the point where you could almost feel it. In the Ottoman camp, prayers were whispered in the darkness of the night. Imams reminded the soldiers of their sacred duty to defend the empire and their faith. Torches flickered against the dark horizon, casting long shadows over the restless janissaries. Horses whinnied and pawed at the earth, sensing the coming storm and the impending battle. The Grand Vizier walked among his commanders, attempting to inspire confidence and courage. But deep down in his heart, he knew that his army was riddled with cracks that could break apart at any given moment. Meanwhile, the Habsburg camps were alive with a completely different spirit. Priests blessed the soldiers as they prepared for battle. Banners proudly bearing the cross of the Holy League waved high above the tents. The thunderous sound of drums echoed as men drilled in formation, demonstrating their readiness. Discipline was their greatest strength, and it was evident in every single movement they made. Charles of Lorraine reminded his men that they stood not only to defend Europe, but also to avenge the devastating humiliation of 1526. His powerful words carried a special fire for the Hungarians among the army, who vividly remembered the day that their kingdom had been shattered on this very ground. Now, they had the opportunity to reclaim their honor and avenge their ancestors. As night fell before the battle, the land was eerily silent, except for the distant sounds emanating from the two great camps. Fires burned in the distance, casting a dim glow that lit up the horizon. The Danube River flowed quietly nearby, as if carrying the heavy weight of history within its waters. Above, the sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the thunder rumbled faintly, as though nature itself was preparing to witness the epic clash that was about to unfold. By dawn, tens of thousands of men would march onto the fields of Mohács, ready to fight and die. The ground that had once swallowed the blood of Hungarians was now ready to consume the blood of Ottomans. Both sides knew exactly what was at stake. For the Ottomans, it was the survival of their pride and power. For the Habsburgs, it was revenge and the promise of a new, more secure Europe. The stage was set, and the entire world held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The morning of August 12th, 1687, broke with a heavy, overcast sky above the Hungarian plains. Mist clung tightly to the grass, and the air was filled with the pungent smell of damp earth. As the sun slowly rose, its weak light revealed the massive Ottoman encampment, which was spread out across the fields near Mohács. Thousands of tents shimmered in the haze, and long lines of cavalry prepared their horses for the day ahead. Across the river and over the rolling hills, the Habsburg and Holy League forces stood ready and prepared, their banners rising proudly with the dawn. Both armies knew that the day would not end without a significant amount of bloodshed. The first sounds of battle emerged with the rhythmic beating of the Ottoman drums. Janissaries struck their instruments with a furious, almost frantic rhythm, their drumming echoing across the open plains. Cavalry units began to form in great waves, their armor and curved scimitars shimmering as they caught the morning light. At their head, Ottoman commanders shouted orders, urging their men forward into battle. The ground shook as the horsemen advanced, thousands of hooves pounding the soil in unison. The Ottomans fully intended to break through the enemy lines with sheer speed and overwhelming force. Just as they had successfully done so many times before, the Habsburgs waited calmly, standing their ground. Charles of Lorraine, had carefully prepared his men with a well-thought-out strategy and a high degree of discipline. The infantry stood in tight, impenetrable formations, muskets loaded and bayonets fixed, ready for the charge. Behind them, artillery batteries lined the slopes, their cannons strategically angled toward the advancing cavalry. Drummers beat a steady, unwavering rhythm, and officers barked commands to hold fire until the enemy was close enough. Every single soldier knew his place, and every man was completely ready to carry out his duty when the Ottoman cavalry thundered within range. The plains erupted in a cacophony of sound and fury. Habsburg cannons fired with devastating power, sending smoke and fire hurtling across the battlefield. The front ranks of Ottoman horsemen fell in heaps, crushed under the weight of men and horses. Men and animals were crushed together in the mud and chaos. Still, the remaining cavalry pressed forward, surging against the blasts, determined to reach the infantry lines and engage them in close combat. Musketeers unleashed devastating volleys of fire, and the sound of gunfire rolled across the plains like thunder. Horses screamed in pain and terror. Men shouted and cried out, and the sky quickly filled with thick smoke. Despite suffering heavy losses, the Ottomans crashed into the imperial lines with incredible force. Scimitars clashed violently against bayonets, and the fighting quickly turned into a brutal, hand-to-hand struggle at close quarters. The Janissaries charged in behind the cavalry, their battle shouts echoing through the chaos. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the sheer weight of their numbers might be enough to push through and break the imperial lines. Imperial soldiers staggered under the intense assault, and the ground became a storm of steel and blood. But the Habsburgs had anticipated this, and they were well prepared for it. Their artillery did not stop firing. Cannons continued to tear massive holes through the Ottoman formations, while musketeers shifted and reloaded with relentless discipline and speed. The infantry held their ground, trading precious space for valuable time, until the Ottoman lines began to stretch thin and weaken. Charles of Lorraine then ordered the Bavarian cavalry to swing around and attack the flanks. As the Ottomans pressed forward, they suddenly found themselves under attack from the sides. Horses smashed into their ranks, and confusion spread like wildfire among their soldiers. The plain quickly became a living nightmare, filled with chaos and death. Dust rose in thick clouds, completely obscuring the sun. Men fought blindly, slashing wildly at shapes that appeared through the thick haze. Drums and horns blared loudly, but orders were lost in the overwhelming roar of battle. The Janissaries tried desperately to rally, but their once legendary discipline was completely broken. Some units bravely pressed forward into the withering fire, while others faltered, turned around, and began to fall back. Sir Suleiman Pasha shouted, trying desperately to regain control of the situation, but his commands were drowned out by the unrelenting chaos of the battle. As the hours dragged on, the tide of battle turned completely in favour of the Habsburgs and their allies. The Habsburg artillery continued to relentlessly hammer the Ottomans from a distance. Their cavalry pressed the flanks, and their infantry held firm, refusing to give ground. Slowly but surely, the Ottoman advance faltered and then collapsed into a full-scale retreat. What had begun as a proud and powerful charge had now turned into a desperate attempt to survive. Horses broke free and ran wild across the plains. Soldiers threw down their weapons and fled in terror. Commanders tried in vain to restore order, but it was simply too late. Then came the final, decisive blow. Charles of Lorraine ordered a full and complete advance. The imperial infantry surged forward, their bayonets gleaming menacingly in the smoke. Musketeers fired as they marched, cutting down the fleeing Ottomans. The Bavarian cavalry rode hard through the gaps in the Ottoman lines, cutting off any and all escape routes. The battlefield quickly transformed into a slaughterhouse. By late afternoon, the Ottoman army was completely broken. Thousands lay dead on the plains of Mohács, their bodies piled high, and their banners trampled into the mud. Survivors fled in panic, scattering in every direction they could find. The once feared Janissaries abandoned the field, their honour shattered beyond repair. The Grand Vizier himself, barely escaped with his life, his dreams of restoring Ottoman glory crushed in the dirt. The victory belonged to the Habsburgs and their allies. They had stood firm against the storm of the Ottoman charge and turned it into a complete and utter disaster for the invading army. The plains of Mohács, once a place of devastating Hungarian defeat, now bore witness to the downfall of the empire that had once ruled over them. When the thunder of cannons finally faded and the smoke slowly lifted from the plains of Mohács, a heavy silence settled over the battlefield. The ground was littered with countless bodies, and the air was thick with the stench of blood and gunpowder. Broken weapons lay scattered in the mud, and torn banners fluttered weakly in the gentle breeze. The once proud and imposing Ottoman camp now stood in ruins, a testament to their crushing defeat. The sun that had risen on an empire's hope now set on its humiliation. The losses suffered by the Ottomans were staggering, almost unimaginable. More than 10,000 Ottoman soldiers lay dead on the battlefield, their bodies piled in heaps where the cavalry charges had collapsed under the devastating cannon fire. Thousands more were wounded or captured, their spirit broken, and their faith in victory utterly destroyed. The surviving soldiers fled in panic, streaming back towards the south, leaving behind not only their dead comrades, but also their dignity and honour. The Janissaries, once the steel backbone of the entire empire, had abandoned the fight. Their retreat was not simply a tactical withdrawal, it represented the complete collapse of the discipline that had been centuries in the making. The Habsburgs walked triumphantly across the battlefield. Charles of Lorraine and Maximilian of Bavaria surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. Their armies, though weary and bloodied from the fierce fighting, had achieved a victory that was far beyond anyone's expectations. Banners of the Holy League rose high above the plains, proudly marking the land as belonging to them. Soldiers cheered in celebration, and priests blessed the fallen, offering prayers for their souls. For the first time in generations, Hungarians felt that the curse of Mohács had finally been lifted. Where once their kingdom had been shattered and destroyed, now the soil had avenged them and their ancestors. The political consequences of the battle reached far beyond the battlefield itself. News of the devastating defeat struck Istanbul like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves throughout the empire. Sultan Mehmed IV, who had ruled for decades, saw his authority crumble in the immediate aftermath. The Janissaries, filled with anger and restlessness, turned their frustration and rage against him. Within weeks of the disaster, the Sultan was deposed from his throne, his power was taken from him, and the Ottoman court descended into complete chaos. The empire that had once shaken the gates of Vienna was now consumed by internal strife, its leaders fighting not against enemies abroad, but against one another at home. For the Habsburg monarchy, the victory was nothing short of transformative. The triumph at Mohács secured their control over Hungary and pushed the Ottomans further back into the Balkans. The Holy League gained considerable momentum, and Europe saw for the very first time that the seemingly unstoppable Ottomans could not only be stopped, but also decisively defeated on open ground. The psychological impact of the victory was immense. The aura of Ottoman invincibility, which had terrified Europe for centuries, had been shattered forever. In Vienna, church bells rang in joyful celebration, and churches were filled with prayers of thanksgiving. The people hailed their commanders as the saviors of Christendom. In Hungary, the survivors of decades of brutal Ottoman occupation looked to the Habsburgs with renewed hope, even though their future would bring new challenges under foreign rule. Still, for that fleeting moment, the victory felt like justice finally being delivered by the hand of history itself. The symbolism of Mohács was undeniable and profound. In 1526, the First Battle of Mohács had marked the utter destruction of Hungary and the subsequent triumph of the Ottoman Empire. In 1687, the Second Battle dramatically reversed that fate. On the very same ground where Hungarian blood had soaked the soil a century and a half earlier, Ottoman blood now marked the clear turning of the tide. History had come full circle. The battlefield, though now silent, told its own story. Crows circled high above, feasting on the fallen. The few remaining survivors limped slowly across the field, desperately searching for their comrades, while priests moved among the dead, offering final prayers for their eternal rest. Soldiers collected weapons, tended to the wounded, and buried their brothers in shallow graves. The Danube River carried away the ashes of campfires and the lingering echoes of screams, leaving only the quiet memory of the storm that had passed. By the time the sun finally set on August the 12th, Mohács had once again irrevocably changed the course of history. The Ottoman Empire's decline was no longer just a distant threat, but a tangible and undeniable reality. The Habsburgs had not only won a battle, they had claimed the future of Central Europe for themselves. The plains of Mohács witnessed two pivotal battles that would echo through the centuries. In 1526, it marked the tragic fall of a kingdom and the ominous rise of Ottoman power. In 1687, it marked the fall of Ottoman pride and the turning of the tide in Europe. For the Ottomans, the defeat was much more than just lost lives and lost land. It was the shattering of their carefully constructed image as an unstoppable, invincible empire. The forced dethronement of Sultan Mehmed IV signaled the beginning of a long and irreversible decline. For the Habsburgs, it was the defining moment when they rose to become the guardians of Central Europe, a position they would hold for centuries to come. Mohács serves as a stark reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, escapes the inevitable cycles of rise and fall. The very same ground that once witnessed Ottoman triumph now witnessed their humiliation and defeat. Do you believe that the Battle of Mohács truly sealed the Ottoman fate in Europe? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below.